One thing, Adam, that I think is really important in therapy as well is movement. And, whether that's yoga or exercise or walking, the science is all there, right? And, one thing I'm so fascinated on is your approach on that by incorporating therapy into twerking. And from my brain, I'm sitting there going, oh, that's a good form of body movement. But can you explain a bit about that? And ease into that? Yeah. I'm just so fascinated.
It's cool because we really dove into the brain and so many cool things. And I was thinking about that, let's talk about the body. Let's talk about the movement now. So yes, please. Absolutely.
Yeah. I guess movement is an important part of life. It's an important part of our physical vessel. It's an important part for our mental health, for our emotional health, for digesting, for processing things. And if we look at it in the nature of intellect versus feeling, I look at the brain as like a masculine structure, and I look at the body as a feminine entity, right? So like we have this, we all have like feminine and masculine within us, and I look at the two parts almost like that. We have the analytical, and then we have the digestion, we have the processing, right? But when you look at trauma, and you look at how trauma is like encoded through the brain, but then the process in which it almost like, because we are, if not the only species or one of the only species in the world that doesn't, like you could see like a gazelle or a zebra or something get chased by a lion, and then you'll notice that afterwards, like they shake their body. Right? Has anyone seen that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I was like, have you guys seen that? I'm like, sure you've watched like some sort of wildlife thing. We don't do that, right? So whether or not it's like we're being chased by someone or we're not being chased by someone, but there's this increase in cortisol, epinephrine, adrenaline, when we have those like stress hormones that are flood in our body, and we're taking in the context and the complex content, and we're taking in the content and all of those things, and we're trying to process this through an experience that we're faced with, and it typically tends to be like, well, depending obviously what experience, there's a sort of encoding that we need to go through, which I'm happy to take you guys through what that looks like as well. But if we don't allow our body to process that sort of flood, we're not letting it go. We go into like almost like a state of freeze. Some people have that, obviously that flight state, that fight state. But even if we fight it out and we get it out of our system, there typically tends to still be this tense feeling, right? Because there's still all of those like stress hormones that are going on, and then we'll kind of just go like, okay, and then we'll just like get on with our day or our life or whatever it might be without actually shaking it out and letting it go. But yeah, when it comes to trauma, there's a certain process that it has to go through in order for it to be like a traumatic experience. So when trauma is encoded, there has to be an event, and the event has to be threatening to the person. There has to be like a perceived level of threat. There has to be like, so that's like tick number one. There has to be a meaning. So the meaning has to be like a personal loss, which could be like a person in your life, physical loss, which is like potentially like the loss of a limb or something like that. Or there is like the loss of, what's the word? Almost like your stature, like the way that you identify yourself. So say, for example, you're the queen, and then all of a sudden like your country hates you, and then you feel like, oh my God, like, that could be seen as like something that, like a public loss, if that makes sense. And then we go through, so it's called like Emily. And then L is for like the landscape. So we had to look at the landscape of the brain, and we had to look at like the person's experiences that they've already been faced with. If they've already been through particular traumatic experiences in a short period of time, they're more likely to have a vulnerable landscape over a more resilient landscape, someone who's maybe built up that resilience or not had something necessarily happen to them that, you know, has felt like very threatening in a long time and has allowed for a process. And then the final one, if all three of those happen without the fourth, typically we have a better chance of recovery without it being encoded within the system. The last one, which is really important and is what typically encodes the trauma within the system, is inescapability. So there has to be a sense of physical or perceived inescapability, helplessness. I can't get out of this.